Part 6, Chapter 6, A New Name, a New Look. Now that they were a band, the Beatles needed to book some gigs. Back then, no one knew they'd be the most popular rock band in the world one day and sell millions of albums. No one knew they'd someday be called the Fab Four, short for Fabulous Four, or that they'd be able to fill baseball stadiums with fans. In those days, when the Beatles came calling, all the club owners saw were 5 scruffy teenagers in beat-up leather jackets. At first, their music wasn't very good. It wasn't their fault. Stu was just learning how to play bass, and he didn't really want to be in the band anyway. He wanted to be a painter. John never took guitar lessons, so he still made a lot of mistakes. Same thing for George and Paul. And the only reason Pete was the drummer was because he owned a drum set. In 1959, they got their first steady job. A club owner in Hamburg, Germany, visited England. He was hoping to find a group of cheap young rock and rollers. He made an offer to the Beatles. Hamburg was far away in another country, but the club owner promised the Beatles a place to sleep and a regular paycheck, even their own dressing room. Naturally, the boys were excited. Their parents, however, were not. Aunt Mimi had always opposed John's dream of playing music. Now she insisted that John stay in art school. Paul's father also put up a fight. He worried that Paul wouldn't get enough to eat if he went to Germany. But like Mimi, Jim knew he couldn't really stop his son. John and Paul were 18 and old enough to do what they wanted, and they wanted to go to Germany. Hamburg sounded great to the boys. When they got there, though, they found that some of the club owners' promises were lies. The club was a dirty, smelly place called the Indra. Their dressing room was actually a public bathroom. They slept on small beds set up behind the screen of a local movie theater. After playing all night, they couldn't even sleep late the next morning. The sound of the movies woke them up. Performing on stage wasn't easy either. In the past, their gigs lasted an hour at the most. In Hamburg, they were on stage for 8 hours. But all that practice did help make them better musicians. John and Paul wrote lots of songs. They also learned how to play dozens of songs. See, look at them, the early years of the Beatles. By their favorite musicians, including Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly, and Chuck Berry. They even made up songs on the spot. That's called jamming. Sometimes they felt tired and grumpy. Playing so hard and not getting enough sleep was taking its toll. They started to take pills to stay awake on stage. They couldn't eat much because they were working so hard. Actually, they often ate while they were playing, right in front of the audience. Their fans were interesting. Sometimes the club would be filled with teenagers who loved the Beatles and sang along with their songs. Other times, the fans had too much beer and got into fights. They threw chairs and swung from lights hanging down from the ceiling. The Beatles didn't mind, though. They thought that was cool. As time passed, the Beatles became more popular and did some shows at bigger clubs. They also made a lot of friends with art school kids who gave the boys advice on how to wear their hair. In Germany, the style was to grow your hair out and comb it forward. The Beatles decided they liked this better than using all that grease. This new hairstyle would become what was called the Beatle mop top. After 4 months, though, the Beatles had had enough of Germany except for Stu. He had fallen in love and wanted to stay in Germany. Everyone else went home to Liverpool, England. The Beatles had become good songwriters and musicians by then, and they liked showing off. They had no trouble getting work now. They even attracted the attention of a local businessman named Brian Epstein. Yep, there's Brian's picture. Brian came from a wealthy family. He wanted to manage a rock band. The Beatles trusted him. Brian had different ideas about what the boys needed to do to make it big. He told them no more eating or drinking on stage. No more leather jackets. Instead, they would wear matching suits and ties. He thought that would make the Beatles more appealing to parents. The band agreed to all of it if Brian would do them one favor. They didn't want Pete to play drums anymore. They wanted someone better, a guy named Ringo Starr, who was in another band. John and Paul were too scared to kick Pete out. He had been their friend, and they didn't want to hurt his feelings. So they had Brian do it. Pete never forgave them for not telling him personally. By 1963, the 4 members of the band were in place: John, Paul, George, and Ringo.